Hey everybody, we are almost done with our series on analysis, but before we can finish that, we have to talk about how to start your essays right after the theme song. Hey there, chickadees and chickadoos. This is the series about introductory paragraphs in analysis essays. If you watched series 2, which is the series about paragraphs, you have probably heard some of what I'm going to say. So if you would like to skip ahead a little bit, you can skip to this time code if you are interested in introductory paragraphs for literary analysis, a poem, a play, a short story, a novel. Or you can skip to this time code, which is where I start talking about rhetorical analysis essays, an argument, a speech, an essay, that kind of thing. But the part that is going to seem to be review for you is this, which is that your introductory paragraphs, like all paragraphs in your essays, every essay you write, has to be apt. That is, you need to keep in mind and write for your audience. You need to make sure that you are leading to your purpose, that thesis or claim that you are making, and that you are using the appropriate and consistent tone. What that means in practice for an analysis is pretty straightforward, and I think if you've been watching all of the episodes in this series to this point, this is also probably review for you. The audience for your text, as I said in the previous episode, think of the audience as a student in your class who read the same text you did, but who doesn't quite get it the way you do. You should not write explicitly to anyone, right? You don't want to be like, Dear Raymond, I have noticed that you read this poem and you don't get it because you're stupid. Don't do that to Raymond, okay? Just keep that thought in mind, that you're writing to an audience who's read it, so you don't have to recap what happened, but who doesn't quite get the thing that you get, who doesn't quite see the thing that you see, which is of course what you're going to say in your purpose. The author has written this because they want us to think differently, feel differently, act differently. And what is that? What is that different thing that we're supposed to be doing, thinking, or feeling? And what are the pieces in particular that you are going to write about? This is your purpose. You need to have all of this in mind. Remember, an analysis is about a close reading. It is your writing the results of your close reading. And a close reading is reading a text carefully to see how it works. So that's your purpose. And this is important because you have to do some planning before you start writing. You need to know what you think the main idea or the claim or the theme of this text is, and you need to know what pieces you're going to write about, what techniques, what portions of the text are you going to focus on. If you don't do that planning, you're not going to be able to write a reasonably good introduction. Now, I said back in series 2, the introductory paragraph does not have to be written first. And in fact, people like me who do get paid to write, we almost never write the introduction first. So do that planning. And then finally, the T for tone. Again, if you've been paying attention in this series, you have probably intuited that the tone needs to be academic. This is not a letter to a friend. This is not a text message. This is not a casual conversation with your teacher. This is a formal analysis of what you have read. That means you need to avoid slang and colloquialisms. You need to avoid, and I'm less of a stickler on this than some teachers, but try not to use a lot of contractions because you want to sound formal. Use the bigger words, right? When you're talking about a particular technique, if you can name that technique and then talk about its effect, that's very important. It shows that you have learned the academic vocabulary that goes with writing an analysis. So keep that in mind. You can use the first person. Hashtag warning, unless your teacher has told you not to use the first person. I do not want you to get in trouble. Take that away. But for me, I see that students can often write a better analysis if they can use words and phrases like I believe, I noticed, I saw, I felt, because that's an honest thing. Now it may be that in revision I will ask students to take some of those out. Don't tell me that you think it, just tell me what it is. But especially in a first draft, that kind of first person usage is appropriate. Okay, we have now reached the aforementioned time code where literary analysis introductions begin. To do this section though, I'm going to talk about Langston Hughes's poem Harlem, which you may remember from some earlier episodes in this series. But even if you do remember it, even if you have read it a million times in the past, I'm going to put it up on the screen for only 5 seconds. So hit pause, read it, then hit unpause, and I will see you when you're done. Okay, you're done? Look, if you're not done, just rewind it a few seconds and read it, okay? I am not a huge fan of formula writing. You can see, for example, my episodes on how the 5-paragraph essay format needs to be murdered, like, a painful and torturous death. Cut off its fingers one at a time and then hold it in a bathtub until it dries. I'm going to stop because I think my therapist probably watches these. Anyway, what I have found though is that there is a particular formula for a first sentence, and I did talk about this back in series 2, but a particular formula for writing a first sentence of a literary analysis that really works well, and it's this. The author's name, comma, an appositive or a positive phrase, and if you don't know what that means, we'll get there in a few minutes. And then another comma, uses technique or techniques. And this is where I was saying you do have to do some planning. If you don't know what techniques you want to write about, then you can't keep going with this sentence. If you don't know the author's theme, you're not going to be able to finish the sentence. So if you're at this point, you're wanting to write your introduction, but you don't know what the rest of your paper is going to be about, stop. Go back to the text, reread it closely, annotate the heck out of it, because you can't write your introduction before you know what you're writing. So uses technique or techniques in genre title. So the genre would be poem, short story, novel, play. That's mostly going to cover your literary analysis. You might have something special like a literary essay. You might have something like a satire. You may even go with a particular kinds of poem, like a lyric poem or an epic poem or something like that. But for the most part, poem, story, play, novel, that covers the gamut of literary analysis. So genre, title, and then to show theme. So as I said, if you know what the theme is, you're good. If you don't, stop writing your introduction. Go back and figure out what you're going to say. Okay, appositives and appositive phrases. That might be new for you. So appositive. An appositive is a noun that renames or describes another noun. And an appositive phrase is a phrase that starts with an appositive. So an example might be something like, my sister, comma, Doreen, comma, invited me to her wedding. Which is, of course, big news because I've been the black sheep in the family for a long time, and Doreen hasn't talked to me, and I'm making it up, I don't have a sister. Or you could say, Doreen, comma, my sister, comma, invited me to her wedding. Or you can even stretch that out into a phrase like, Doreen, comma, my sister who hasn't spoken to me in years, comma, invited me to her wedding. So the appositive or appositive phrase gives us some tidbit of information, some important piece of the puzzle as to why an author might be concerned about this particular theme or writing about this particular topic. For Langston Hughes, especially looking at a poem like Harlem, you're going to want to say that Hughes is a Harlem Renaissance writer. The Harlem Renaissance, of course, being that time in the first half of the 20th century when African Americans from all over the country flocked to Harlem, and Harlem became the center of all things arts for the African American community. Langston Hughes, like many of his Harlem Renaissance contemporaries, had feelings about the way Black people are treated in this country. So, putting that all together and thinking about what is going on in the poem Harlem, we might write this as a first sentence. Langston Hughes, a Harlem Renaissance writer, uses simile and metaphor in the poem Harlem to show how dangerous it is to keep a people down. Now, I said I'm not a fan of formula writing, but a couple of things here are not negotiable for an introductory paragraph on a literary analysis. In that first paragraph, you have to say the author's name. You need to cue your audience about who wrote this thing, and you need to say the title because you need to narrow it down. If you say, in this poem by Langston Hughes, there are like 1,000 poems there could possibly be. So in the poem Harlem by Langston Hughes, you've got that title and author's name that is there. In your introductory paragraph, you want to get to some hint of the author's theme, and you need to talk about what techniques are going to feature in your analysis. If you can do that without following my formula, that is awesome, that is fine. But if you struggle with writing literary analysis papers in general and introductions in particular, this formula works. Now I know what you're thinking, because of course I'm psychic. That's just one of my many special powers. You're looking at that picture right there and you're thinking, whoa, 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 there is a second sentence. And there is, because that one sentence is probably not quite enough to get us through the introduction to your essay. Let's take a look at that second sentence, large enough that you can read it. The combination of disgusting and deadly images work together to show the potential consequences of America's oppression of African Americans. So what I've done there in the follow-up sentence is begin to make that connection. I talked in the previous episode about connecting the dots. You have to do that in an analysis. If you want to show your friend Raymond how you get it in a way that he doesn't, you've got to be able to connect the dots for Raymond. So if you are using this introductory formula for your first sentence, use the second sentence or even a third sentence in addition to start making some of those connections. We know that what Langston Hughes wrote about in Harlem, the similes and the metaphors that he used about, you know, the syrupy sweet or the explosion-y part at the end, those are things that have a particular connotation, that have a particular feeling, and we can now connect that to the danger that we talked about earlier. It is possible to write a bad introductory paragraph for a literary analysis, and it would do a lot of those things that I just told you not to do. Here, for example, is a terrible, terrible first paragraph for a literary analysis. This poem has similes in it. Some of them are disgusting. The author is angry. He doesn't want to see people discriminated against. Now, on its own, none of those things is false about this poem. But that bad paragraph, that collection of 4 short, terrible sentences, doesn't answer the question of what do you get that other people don't, which is that these images that are disgusting and frightening and angry are what make us feel the danger in treating the African American people the way that they have been treated, by deferring their dreams. And, you know, the author's name isn't there, the title isn't there, the genre isn't there. I mean, yeah. All right, we're now at the part where we're talking about rhetorical analysis. A rhetorical analysis is, of course, different, but it's also very much the same. You are looking, instead of at a piece of literary text, you're looking at a piece of informational text and writing about what makes that text work. What are the techniques that the author is using in order to get the claim across? Now, Series 5 of this particular program is going to be all about rhetoric, and it will dig more deeply into the kinds of things your rhetorical analysis will be about. But this is the series on analysis, and we're talking about introductory paragraphs, so I want to spend a few minutes talking about a good way to approach a rhetorical analysis introduction. And it begins with an acronym, because I love acronyms. That's just all there is. The acronym in this case is SOAPstone. You may have heard it. You may have just heard SOAPs. But in any case, this is what SOAPstone means. When you're reading an informational text, you ought to be able to identify what kind of person is the speaker of the argument. And I like to tell students that the wrong answer for speaker is the speaker's name. The wrong answer for speaker is the speaker's job. Even more so than with a literary analysis, you need to consider what makes this speaker a good person to make this argument now, or to get this point across now. So just their name, not enough. The occasion, what prompted the speaker to make this particular argument at this time? Audience, who is the author trying to reach with this argument? The purpose, what is the specific argument the speaker is making? And the subject, what is the general subject that the author is talking about? And the tone, what is the speaker's attitude toward the subject? And I don't need to review tone with you because I've already covered it in this series, but I will just say, because I love saying it, mad, sad, glad, afraid. Okay, there, I did it. It's out of my system. No, it's not. Mad, sad, glad, afraid. All right, now I am going to give you a sample introduction that does follow a kind of a formula based on SOAPstone. But I'm going to do it for the text A Presumption of Guilt, which was the text that starred in Series 3 of this program, the series about arguments. It's by Bryan Stevenson. There is a link to it down in the description. It is 29 paragraphs long. I am not going to put it up on the screen for 5 seconds and ask you to pause and read it. But if you did not watch Series 3 or haven't read this text yet, please do so before you continue. Why are you continuing? I told you to read it. Okay, yeah. Now I feel satisfied you've at least read a little bit. You can get what I'm trying to say. So this is the formula that I like to use. SOS, AP, twist, plus 2. And this, for my AP English language students, is pretty easy to remember because SOS means help me, I am in danger, and AP, of course, means in my AP English class. Twist is something that you may have heard before. There is something called the twist thesis, which means that you choose one or all or somewhere in between of these things. Tone, word choice, that's the W. Diction is another way of saying it, but it doesn't fit into the acronym. I love acronyms. Imagery, which in a rhetorical analysis, you probably aren't going to spend a lot of time on. Syntax, which is sentence structure, and if you stick around for our future series, the more advanced series on sentences, I will talk a lot about syntax. And then finally, theme. What I like to say is that when you do SOS, AP, then twist, you should do tone, because tone is always a gimme, right? Mad, sad, glad, afraid, you can do that. And then pick one of the others, typically diction, syntax, or theme. Plus 2 down here at the bottom, what I like about the plus 2 is that each of these SOS, AP, and twist is a sentence, and it's a long sentence. But if you end your first paragraph with a short sentence, 2 words, maybe 4 words, 6 words, no more than that, If you end with the short sentence, you're going to give the impression to whoever it is who's reading this, your English teacher, the people who are reading your AP English Language and Composition exam in a stuffy hotel ballroom sometime in June when they don't really want to be working. You are going to impress upon them that you really know what you're talking about. It is absolutely true that a short sentence, especially after some long ones, but that short sentence where you're including a very important point, it resonates, it hits home. Pay attention to the informational texts that you read for the next few weeks or months, and look for those short sentences. You're going to find that professional authors use that a lot. You should be able to use it to your advantage when you're doing an analysis. So let's take a look at how that shakes out for our text, A Presumption of Guilt. In his essay, A Presumption of Guilt, noted scholar of lynchings in America Bryan Stevenson writes about the lingering effects of racism on our criminal justice system today. SOS, the speaker, the occasion, and the general subject. Now, those of you who didn't skip automatically to this section and you watched the section on literary analysis, you're going to recognize the appositive or the appositive phrase there. If you didn't watch the section on literary analysis, just scroll back until you see the words appositive and appositive phrase very big, read that slide and move on. Come back to here. Because S, the speaker, really is about that kind of extra tidbit, this thing that you have gleaned about the author from his or her text, that lets us know why they're the right person to make that argument and why they are interested in this argument in the first place. All right, let's move on to the second sentence, the AP, audience and purpose. He tells his well-educated audience that this legacy reaches in particular into capital punishment cases in the South, though it is not limited to that region. Remember that by the end of his text, Stevenson has had this call to action where he says we've got to end the death penalty. It disproportionately affects African Americans. It needs to stop. So that is a clear statement of the purpose. And we mentioned in there the audience, the New York Review of Books. That's where this was published. If you don't know, is one of the most respected collections of book reviews in the country. They invite people to review books and to write scholarly articles or smart essays and arguments like this one because they know that their audience wants to be smarter than they are, which is already pretty smart. This essay, Stevenson's essay, would have to be very different if his audience were different. If you were writing this as an article for like MTV News or something, it would be different. If he were trying to publish it in your local newspaper, it would be much shorter and also written for a much dumber audience because American newspapers really aim for the lowest common denominator. It could be why they're failing. I don't know. I just talk on TV. Well, it's not even TV. Maybe I'm not a good person to make that argument. But anyway, let's take a look at the twist. And I'm going to use tone and theme because when you're writing a rhetorical analysis, that idea of theme can really be about the author's use of evidence, because in an argument you have to have claim, evidence, and warrant. And if you go back and you watch Series 3 about argument, I talk about Stevenson's claim, the evidence he uses, and the warrants he uses to connect those two. But anyway, here it is. With an academic air, Stevenson presents overwhelming evidence not only for the severity of America's deadly past, but also for the unfairness in contemporary applications of the death penalty. So I've got that little bit of tone there just with an introductory prepositional phrase. But then I talk about why all of that evidence is necessary and how complete and conclusive that evidence is. Overwhelming evidence, I said, because, he starts at the end of the Civil War with Reconstruction. He comes up to the present day. That's, if my math is about right, 150 years of evidence that he employs. It certainly feels overwhelming. I'm going to put this back up one more time, even though you may already have read this last sentence, the +2, which in this case is a +4. I couldn't figure out how to do just two words, but it goes like this. End it, he says. Just a a punctuation mark at the end of that paragraph, a little bit of, I'm going to remind you what Stevenson's call to action was. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with him. And that is an important distinction. And it's the last thing I'm going to leave you with in this particular episode. You do not want to begin or end or put it anywhere in the middle whether or not you think the speaker is right when you're doing a rhetorical analysis. This is not an evaluation. You're not a critic deciding whether or not someone's argument is worthwhile. You are just saying, here's the text. Here are the techniques being used in the text, and here's the claim that comes out of it. Here's the evidence that supports it. Here's the warrant that makes the connection. And that is what you are analyzing, okay? So it is always tempting to throw in that I agree with him, the death penalty is terrible, or to try to oppose him. You know, the death penalty has been around for, tens of thousands of years. Eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, that kind of thing. But you don't want to do that in a rhetorical analysis. So there we go. I hope that has helped you conceptualize the introductory paragraph for your analysis. I have one last little thing that I want to leave you with. English teachers, here's the thing. We are assigning this analysis to all of our students, right? I have 170 sophomores this year, for example, and when I give them a poem and they have to write an analysis on it, I don't want to read 170 of the same paper. One of the things that you can do to make your essay stand out a little bit, and it's not difficult, is you give your analysis a title. And the title of your analysis should not be the name of the text. The title of your analysis should not be my analysis. The title should be something clever and something funny. If you were writing about Harlem by Langston Hughes, you might call it Dynamite Dynamics, because there is that explosion, but also he's writing about the dynamics of a situation in which one person or one people has had its or their dream deferred. If you were going to write about the Bryan Stevenson piece, you might actually say overwhelming evidence as your title, or end it, he says, as your title. Go ahead and use that little piece of punctuation, your +2, or as I said in this case, +4, from the end of your paragraph. If you were in a high-stress situation, if you're writing for the advanced placement exam or an international baccalaureate exam or something like that, where you don't necessarily have time to think of something clever to be a title, or even to write a whole lot of introduction, you can condense your introduction and you can omit the title. The AP readers, the IB readers, they're not that interested in your titles, but rather have you demonstrated in this 40-minute or 2-hour time period what it is that you have learned over the last 10 to 12 to 14 years of your schooling. So that's it. We've got one more episode coming up. It's about quoting from the text, and I will see you for the next one. My sister, comma, nope. You could also do something like this. Nope. This is going to be the one. You could also do something like this. Doreen, comma, my sister with the gimpy leg, comma, invited me to her wedding. Now, I shouldn't say gimpy. That's probably not PC.